Today I've got a strange, depressing, and insane clip of Lewis Goodall asking basic questions to former anti-Semitism envoy Michal Cotler-Wunsh, and she falls apart through the most basic questions, can't answer questions, and has a weird new talking point. Let's get straight into the video.
An Israeli minister, Amichai Chikli, inviting far-right activist Tommy Robinson to visit Israel, praising him as a courageous leader against radical Islam. Leading British Jewish organisations, we should say, including the Board of Deputies and the Jewish Leadership Council, strongly condemning the invitation, labelling Robinson a thug who represents the very worst of Britain. Well, we're joined now by Michal Cotler-Wunsh, who's Israel's former special envoy for combating anti-Semitism, resigned from her post this week and has clashed with that same minister, the Diaspora Affairs Minister Chikli, earlier this year over far-right invites to the country. Michelle, thanks so much for joining us this morning. To many of us in Britain, this seems an extraordinary turn of events, perhaps less extraordinary to you who's been following it closely. Is this part of a pattern?
I think it's part of a lack of understanding, including in Israel, that anti-Semitism has one definition, whether it comes from the extreme right, the extreme left, the extreme Islamist, the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism, the result of a very long democratic process that was adopted by more than 40 countries, including the UK, across institutions and many of the universities in the UK, enables to identify and combat anti-Semitism for precisely what it is, which is the predictor of extremism, as I said, no matter where it comes from. And that is, in fact, in many, many ways, what's been the hindrance across spaces and places in comprehensively identifying and combating and actually being able to even identify what has become the normalized mainstream strain of anti-Semitism that is ravaging democracies around the world, including in the UK, including with the murder of two people, Jews, praying on the holiest day of the Jewish calendar on Yom Kippur in Manchester, then leading to protests essentially in support of their murderers.
Well, I think everybody, the people involved, we're going to be speaking to one of those people in a moment, Michelle, but the people who've been turning up to these protests, they would deny vehemently the idea that they are turning up in support of that murder. They are saying that they are protesting against Israel's actions, which have been called genocidal by the United Nations in Gaza.
Let's be very clear. Genocide has a definition. The fact that the United Nations and its agencies and institutions, and I'm going to say the human rights infrastructure.
Yes, Michelle, but just yes, I know that. But you accuse those people of supporting that murder. On what basis do you say that?
Please allow me to respond. Genocide has a definition. And in very, very many...
Yes, destroying a people, ethnicity, religion, in part or in whole. It met 4 of the 5 criteria for genocide. Only people who deny reality at this point don't believe that Israel is committing a genocide. There is no argument. There is no argument. Tens of thousands of women, children. We don't even know the extent. They won't even let journalists in. There is no argument here. Yes, there's the legal argument, but the moral argument was settled, well, pretty much 2 years ago when they went in there with the intent of flattening Gaza, which they have done.
Places, including the UK, those people who think they're showing up in support of what is dubbed pro-Palestinian, if they were pro-Palestinian protests, they would be protesting to free Gaza from Hamas, a prescribed terror organization for whom human tragedy is the strategy.
They're protesting against...
See, the talking points, this human strategy is human... I mean, it's not serious at this point. And also, Israel is one of the biggest rogue states on the planet, committing a genocide, enabled by the richest country on the planet, enabled by Britain, and probably going to get away with it at this point. Is Trump going to do anything? No. Is Keir Starmer going to do anything? No.
They're protesting against the thousands of deaths that we've seen, including children in Gaza. That's what they're protesting against, and you don't get to choose, you don't get to decide what people protest about.
That is the strategy. Look, I came on today to make very...
So it's all on Hamas? No Israel, no agency?
clear that those protests are, in fact, enabling the continued war in Gaza, the continued holding.
So it's the protesters' fault that Netanyahu keeps the war going,
Please let me finish a sentence. Please allow me to finish a sentence. The continued holding.
No, he has a right. Debate rules. If you say something really fucking stupid, you get to interject. What the fuck is that new talking point? Protests enable a genocide. Protests against the genocide enable that genocide. So if people stop protesting, you'll stop the genocide? That's already kind of been done? What the fuck is this? Like, how do you even... I can't even kind of break this down because it's so stupid and irrational and illogical. So, like, we wouldn't... If you weren't protesting this, we wouldn't have done it. But you started it for, like... Oh, my God.
48 human beings abducted on October the 7th when more than 1,200 people were burned alive and butchered and raped, and more than 250 were abducted into that same Gaza.
So sorry, Michelle. Sorry, let me just get this straight. Let me just get this straight.
Terror organization that uses the children of Gaza and the people of Gaza as human shields.
So let me just get this straight. Let me just get this straight.
Sure,
you're saying
absolutely.
you're saying that the reason that those poor souls, the hostages, are still being detained, or one of the reasons, is because people turn out week after week on the streets of Britain to protest what they see as the inhumane, disproportionate, outrageous response of the Israeli government to civilians in Gaza. You're saying that it's their fault, and it's not Netanyahu. No, let me finish the question. And it's not Netanyahu's fault who chooses to continue to prosecute this war. We should blame those people turning up on the streets of Britain, should we?
Israel has been embroiled in what is a 2-year-long war that began on October the 7th, launching thousands of rockets.
Yes.
No, it didn't. It began in 48 with the ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian people. 750,000 people. Brutal blockades, apartheid state, 64 laws that disenfranchise Palestinian people. I mean, this isn't an argument. These are just talking points, not backed up by evidence. Obviously, October the 7th happened. Some people don't believe that, and I wish they'd stop saying that. But we have to talk about the responsibility of Israel, Netanyahu, and their government, and the IDF.
No one denies that.
Not just by Hamas, but by Hezbollah, by the Houthis, by Iran itself, the criminal Islamic regime in Iran. So if people in London truly care about human rights, they would be not just protesting to free Gaza from Hamas, but to free Lebanon from Hezbollah, to free Yemen from the Houthis.
Okay, so what about Islam? Again, not an argument.
Is what they care.
Iran from the genocidal Islamic Republic. Instead, what they are doing is actually
in order to protest about
the state
something,
of Israel, a fellow democracy.
So Michelle, your view is
it's like bingo. Oh, the democracy. Yes, a deeply flawed democracy that is committing a genocide, a occupation, a brutal settler colonial project, killing children, sniping children in the head, in the testicles. Whether you're a democracy doesn't really matter to me, to be honest.
From the same genocidal terror and tyranny that endangers the UK.
So your view is that to protest about anything, you have to protest about everything.
Absolutely not, and God forbid.
Right, okay. Well, then no one would ever protest about it.
It's not an argument. Okay, so everything that's happening in the world. Darfur, Eritrea, Sudan. I mean, I could be here all day with what's going on. Ukraine, Yemen. It's not an argument.
Anything.
That's actually precisely what's happening on the streets of London. What has happened over the last 2 years is the emboldening of genocidal terror proxies of an Islamic criminal regime in Iran.
What role do you think the Israeli government might have had in that, Michelle? Anything at all?
You're not letting me finish one sentence, and I doubt that anybody can understand.
Because you're not saying anything, and he has a right. Answer the questions. What role does Israel play in this? Any? Like, Any responsibility? Any agency?
Anything we're saying in this way. Please allow me to finish a sentence so at least your listeners can doubt a little bit of what it is that's happening on the streets. And I don't doubt the good intent of the majority of the people that are showing up on the streets, actually believing that what they're fighting for is human rights. But what
They are, though. A genocide is happening. They are fighting for human rights. And there has been arrested. There probably is anti-Semitism. Statistically, we've had thousands of protests over the last 2 years. Statistically, there are going to be people with bad intentions. They need to be made irrelevant and condemned and shunned from the protests. But the majority, as you admit, are there in good faith.
they are emboldening is the same genocidal terror and tyranny that Churchill warned Chamberlain that when given the choice between dishonor and war, when you choose dishonor, you will have war. We are embroiled and on the front lines of, that is the state of Israel, a war of barbarism on our civilization.
So you welcome...
All projection. Barbarism. Who's committing the genocide right now? Enabled by the most powerful, most sophisticated. I mean, they've been developing some of the most sophisticated military equipment. AI snipers, AI automated guns, insane stuff. There's a really good book about it by a guy called, I can't remember his name, Anthony someone. And it just shows you how America and Israel have worked together to make one of the most sophisticated, sadistic military technology infrastructures. Insane.
So do you think Israel should welcome Tommy Robinson?
It has nothing to do with Tommy Robinson, and this interview for me has nothing at all to do with what it is that you began with. Tommy Robinson and many others have to utilize the IRA working definition of anti-Semitism to identify the anti-Semitism in their own backyard, if you will, if they're actually committed to combating anti-Semitism. That is the test, because as I said, it's interesting how the far or extreme right, the far or extreme left, the far or extreme Islamists intersect at that ever-mutating, lethal, viral hate that is anti-Semitism, that the IRA definition actually enables to identify all strains.
One final thing, Michal.
Whether they are the traditional strains or the new strain, modern strain, just the anti-Zionist strain that has systematic...
Okay, not the same. Conflating anti-Zionism, which is a political ideology, and anti-Semitism, which is a group of people, Jewish people, is not the same. You can criticize socialism, Marxism, patriotism, any political ideology on the left or right. To conflate that is anti-Semitic, that is dangerous. And we've seen that with the protest, saying that, Jewish people now who were protesting against genocide are somehow traitors or anti-Semitic. It's insane. It's insane and really dangerous as well.
And for decades, demonized, delegitimized, and applied double standards to the state of Israel, the Jew among nations.
No, apply the same standards. You don't get to do a genocide. You don't get to do apartheid. And you need to adhere to international law. Like every other country, like Russia does. I don't like Russia. I don't like China. All fascist states. Israel, I don't like them. And North Korea. I'm a human rights democracy guy. You pretend to be a flawed democracy. But if you're committing a genocide, that becomes irrelevant to me.
One final thing, Michal. You say you don't doubt the intentions. I will just note that you began this interview by alleging that people who are turning up to those protests are celebrating and doing so, supporting the heinous events that happened in Manchester. That is clearly...
What is it that you think
I'm just repeating what you said.
The brutal murder of anybody else would actually justify protests that celebrate those murderers?
They didn't celebrate those murders, Michal. Well, then clearly you're just going back on what you yourself just said when you said you don't doubt the intentions of many of those people, because once again...
What evidence does she have for that claim, though? She can't just... She's saying that. What evidence?
Again, you've alleged, without any evidence, as far as I can tell or see, that those people are supporting the murders that we saw in Manchester. So that's completely outrageous. That's completely outrageous. But I just wanted to ask one final question.
Is in fact the
if you wouldn't mind, before shouting.
Because you asked me a question.
No, I didn't ask you a question. I gave the audience a piece of information. I just want to ask you one final question, which is, you have been quick to assign blame for the extremism that we're seeing, and indeed for the continuation of the war itself in a way that I don't quite follow, to the people who have been turning up on the streets of Britain week after week in protest as to what's happening in Gaza. What role, if any, do you assign to the Netanyahu government for A, continuing that war and for the hostages not being released, and secondly, for the rising extremism that we're seeing, because many, many people believe, and many, many international institutions say that a genocide is being committed in Gaza, that the response has been disproportionate. So what blame do you think the Israeli government has in this?
Perhaps you'd be able to follow if you allowed me to finish one coherent thought. And worse, perhaps you're listening.
But you haven't had a coherent thought yet. Have a coherent thought and we can... But this is all NPC talking points. Let's see if she answers the question.
Listeners or viewers will be able to follow if you allow me to finish one coherent sentence. But what I've tried to make accessible to you is that I'm trying to sound the alarms for you in the UK. It is the UK itself and other democracies that have to recognize that it's the UN itself that has enabled its own foundational principles.
Oh, so it's the UN's fault, right? Okay.
You're not letting me finish a sentence again. To be hijacked, redefined, inverted, weaponized, to demonize, delegitimize, and apply double standards to the Jew among nations. But as always with anti-Semitism, what starts with the Jews never ends with the Jews. An ever-mutating lethal hate, as the former chief...
How is criticizing and applying international law to Israel anti-Semitism? That does not make sense.
Rabbi of the UK explained very clearly, is just the most reliable sign of a major threat to humanity, freedom, and the dignity of difference of all. And maybe it would be good to pay attention to what is actually playing out with Israel on the front lines of a raging war of barbarism on our shared civilization, and not be caught up with what you may think.
Yeah, I agree. A raging war of barbarism against the Palestinian people.
That you understand and you know better than Israel that's been engaged and fighting prescribed terror organizations and their patrons, Qatar, and their Islamic Republic of Iran, that actually does the very same thing to the people of Iran that have been betrayed over and over by democracies. And all that we've seen on the streets is not pro-Palestinian, but anti-West, anti-democracy, anti-human rights, and anti-Semitic protest.
Michal, I'm grateful to you. People will make up their own minds as to how much of that they felt was coherent or not, regardless or not of whether I let Michal finish the sentence.
Not an honest conversation. And of course you can't, because Israel are committing a genocide. She's not going to fess up and say, yeah, well, we need to know, Netanyahu needs to go to The Hague, we need to be held accountable. They have to double down. They have to deny, deflect, not answer questions. She didn't answer the question. What role do they have? Because she knows that Israel has the power to stop this. America does. Britain does. Will they? Well, it doesn't look like right now. Maybe there's a deal with Trump. Doesn't seem like a great deal. But I guess we'll see what happens next. Hit the like button and I'll see you in the next video.